I feel very graced that I was brought into what feels like my destiny to connect with this lineage and this system, which is basically about looking at the chart as a way to understand that this human lifetime doesn't have meaning or purpose or value for its own sake. Like there's something underneath the surface that's going on here. When we think of it from a soul perspective, we recognize that this life is kind of like a school or a template within which everything that arises, every part of it is intimately, deeply, intricately relevant to our ongoing awakening. So awakening here is just the remembering of what we are. We're wearing this cloak of the human personality, the human body, and we're having these experiences coming into relationship from the point of view of the soul. And we can define the soul as you take your memories, your self-concept, your body, and you just throw all that away. What's left is your soul, right? The thing that is always here. And in the coming and the going of circumstance, in the coming and the going of identity, in the coming and going of bodies, the soul is what we are. And that's what I'm thinking of when I use that word. And so what happens is a soul creates human life experience as a vehicle to play out its desires. We're here because we all want something. And that's what this is about. We are pursuing our desires, but we're also exhausting our desires. And it's the gradual exhaustion of our desires, which are then replaced by a new set, which are then exhausted, leads us progressively on this path of everything that comes and fulfills me also goes at a certain point. You know, we might let go of things or things might be taken from us, so to speak. In the end of the day, we're brought back to ourselves over and over and over and over and over again.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Be the Vessel podcast. My name is Daniel and I play the roles of channeler and intuitive psychologist, aiming to bridge all aspects of the healing arts while navigating my return journey to the stars. I interview those journeying through all aspects of healing, whether that be from more traditional Western frames or from a more spiritual or spirit-based connection. What I always find is that everyone is a bridge between worlds, a universe unto themselves, and a unique light that shines brightly for the collective. If you like what you hear and are interested in more of my offerings, consider joining the Be the Vessel community at patreon.com/Dr. Daniel Atkins, where you will find various unique offerings, bonus content, and podcasts such as my own channeled information and the new Be the Vessel healing series. May you find what you're looking for and remember the light within. And lastly, the views in this episode do not represent my personal views, nor are they to be taken as medical advice or scientific fact. Always do your own research, come to your own conclusions, and trust your own guidance. Ari Moshe Wolfe is an evolutionary astrologer who teaches and practices astrology as a spiritual tool in service to our soul evolution. His teaching is rooted in the lineage of evolutionary astrology as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green and continues to blossom with his own ongoing realization. He is also a devotee of A Course in Miracles, which he naturally incorporates into his work, and a musician founded in devotion and love. Please enjoy this conversation with Ari as he elucidates the key principles of evolutionary astrology and its basis in the evolution of the soul. In this conversation, we focus on the meaning of Pluto and the nodes of the moon in one's natal chart as a representation of our karmic and dharmic reasons for this incarnation, as well as how we are designed to play this out through our innate desires. May this be an invitation for your own expansion and soul growth on the path to self-realization. And lastly, this episode had to be cut short due to time, so you will hear an abrupt transition as I close out this episode with my own musings and reflection. Thanks for listening. Hi, Ari. Thanks so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm super excited for this chat, as it tends to happen for me. You popped up on YouTube and like literally that day you were offering a free course on planets squaring the nodes and evolutionary astrology, which I'd heard that name, but I didn't know a ton about. Was fascinated, joined, loved your style, your approach, and from what I understand, evolutionary astrology's relationship to the soul path, which is just deeply resonant for me. I don't know much about the lineage of Jeffrey Wolf Green, but I'm excited to dig in further, and so I will just open it up from here and kind of let you lay the land of evolutionary astrology as much of the foundation as you'd like to build. And from what I understand, it does use the Western tropical frame, but you just fill in the gaps and we'll go from there.
Great. Well, thank you for this invitation and your enthusiasm to share in this learning. The system of evolutionary astrology, something that Jeffrey Wolf Green brought forward. I'll start with where it comes from, and then we'll explain what it does, what it points to, how it serves. So this actually came from Sri Yukteswar originally, where Sri Yukteswar, who was known during his incarnation as the guru of Yogananda. So for those who are familiar with Yogananda, wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, references his teacher many times, and he was known during that lifetime as an astrologer, a pretty profoundly brilliant astrologer. So he came to Jeff Green in the 70s in a dream, kind of downloaded this information. And as my teacher has shared, this is pretty much ancient knowledge. And I think right now in the world, we're seeing a re-emergence of ancient knowledge, be it, texts that we're discovering from a long time ago, or just the remembering of things that we used to know. And this is a way of looking at astrology, right? The position of the planets and asteroids, etc., at the moment, location of birth, from the point of view of understanding the soul's evolutionary journey from life to life. I think this is knowledge that we've had as a human species a long time ago, during higher ages, during the current, cycle. But it's been lost to the point whereas at the apex of the dark ages, just the past 1,000, 2,000 years or so, this knowledge was so hidden and obscure that, you would be persecuted basically for believing or talking about many of these things that we're now openly exploring and discussing. But the knowledge of astrology and how it relates to the soul is pretty ancient. And living from a soul-focused point of view is something that we're beginning to see emerge more and more because it's safer to do so now. We're not going to be burned at the stake, and there's more of an openness amongst humanity.
We'll just be made fun of in certain circles, but that's okay.
Sure, and that's nothing in comparison, right?
Right.
But we're all starting to wake up, right? There's an awakening occurring, and so we're thirsty and we're hungry for this deeper perspective. So I think as astrology's been emerging, its first level was more of a superficial, personality oriented, right?
Yeah, horoscope.
So what happened in EA, and that, for me, that's a part of what turned me off when I first started studying.
Yeah.
Like many of us, I had an intuition that astrology is real, like that actually there's reality to it, but I wasn't able to speak to, and I think many people on the spiritual path know that there must be something to it. I think where a lot of us feel a little bit disheartened or skeptical, right? Mm-hmm. Is once we start seeing people trying to actually utilize it. It's very easy for astrology to move quickly into what feels like actually more of a distraction from the path, right?
Yeah.
Too descriptive, too defining, or predictive.
I was going to say too predictive, right?
In a way that takes away our own agency and of course brings up more of those existential questions. So I was always wanting to just know, what does it mean to have this chart? Like, what is it? I feel very graced that I was brought into what feels like my destiny to connect with this lineage and this system, which is basically about looking at the chart as a way to understand that this human lifetime doesn't have meaning or purpose or value for its own sake. Like, there's something underneath the surface that's going on here. So let's just talk about that. And then we'll bridge it to astrology, but I'll share my perspective on what the hell's going on here.
Great.
So this human incarnation, this human experience, when we think of it from a soul perspective, we recognize that this life is kind of like a school or a template within which everything that arises, every part of it is intimately, deeply, intricately relevant to our ongoing awakening. And so awakening here is just the remembering of what we are. We're wearing this cloak of the human personality, the human body, and we're having these experiences coming into relationship from the point of view of the soul. And we can define the soul as you take your memories, your self-concept, your body, and you just throw all that away. What's left is your soul, right? The thing that is always here. And in the coming and the going of circumstance, in the coming and the going of identity, in the coming and going of bodies, the soul is what we are. And that's what I'm thinking of when I use that word. So from a soul perspective, we're all gradually remembering and awakening to this essence that we actually are. And so what happens is a soul creates human life experience as a vehicle to play out its desires. We're here because we all want something, right? This wouldn't be an evolutionary journey if there wasn't some kind of experience that was otherwise valuable for us. So we're all wanting to experience something, which means we see that there's something more that we are lacking. I'm wanting a relationship. I'm wanting to make more money. We have all kinds of desires directed towards worldly experience. And that's what this is about. We are pursuing our desires, but we're also exhausting our desires. And it's the gradual exhaustion of our desires, which are then replaced by a new set, which are then exhausted, leads us progressively on this path of everything that comes and fulfills me also goes at a certain point. You know, we might let go of things or things might be taken from us, so to speak. In the end of the day, we're brought back to ourselves over and over and over and over and over again. Like nothing provides ephemeral satisfaction and security. We can get stuck and fixated on this thing that we want, on the desires that we're trying to fulfill, or on that relationship that just didn't work out, but we can stay stuck on it for lifetimes. So when we leave this world, we take with us not our possessions, not our body, but the soul memory of whatever we've been holding on to. It's embedded within our unconscious, the fixations, the attachments, the desires, the grievances, the unresolved content of the soul is what remains. And that becomes the basis for creating more experience. So we manifest ourselves within the vehicle of human experience, of time and space, within a particular body, culture, family, society. That's the Saturn dimension, right? We come into a particular template or structure that represents sort of the form or the template of this human experience in time and space. We develop an ego structure, and all of this becomes, this is what I'm doing as a human. But it's all to serve the purpose of the desires that we're continuing to work out. You know, in those last 5 lives, you know, I try to hold on to this relationship. Each time I was betrayed or abandoned or it couldn't work, or I was in these patterns of manipulation or being manipulated, these patterns, right? And in this lifetime, I'm going to continue to work that out. And we're going to meet other souls that have been working out their soul content along with us, right? We're going to share this stage and we'll re-meet probably in different forms. It may not be the same arrangement. And that's the beauty of seeing this life journey from a soul perspective. Everything points back down to what is the path of awakening now? How is this pointing back to where you're working out your own attachments, your own desires? And sometimes the journey is about claiming our desire and doing something about it. Sometimes it's about being able to let go of what served its evolutionary purpose and allow things to end. It's kind of always a question of what do we want most? So Jeff Green teaches, and this is a really beautiful teaching, that within the soul, within our being, we can all relate to this tangibly, are 2 antithetical desires. You can think of it as the desire to return home, or the desire for truth alone, and the desire for all the other stuff. And we're always working out those 2 polarities. And we get to these points along the journey, not polarities, but these 2 antithetical dynamics. And we get to these points along the journey where we're going to face with, okay, I can fixate on my resentment, on my unresolved grievance, on my perceptions of being victimized. Or I can turn towards, but I want to evolve. And really, if you look at it deeply enough, this life journey is kind of just a crux between those two choices. We seemingly have a lot of little choices that we make along the journey. At the core of it, it's between continuing to work out our security through what's ultimately not going to provide security, or evolve. And that energy of cooperation with evolution means whatever it takes, whatever we need to do. And to be clear, this doesn't mean whenever we are like, I want to make more, we have desires and we have to fulfill them. But there comes a point along the journey where it's no longer serving our own growth. Every single thing in this world, everything, even something that 5 minutes ago was helpful and relevant and aided our life, can become the point of immense suffering. And the grace of the soul journey is that when we're taught by so many of our teachers from traditions that have gone on for a long time, to always practice coming back within, right? To have an anchor in God, to have an anchor in eternity, in the soul, so we can realize what we are. So we can say this evolutionary journey is the soul's gradual journey of shifting their identifications from ego, from the world, from I'm going to be defined by this, to the soul itself. As we evolve, our understanding of self, our self-concept, moves more within to I am an eternal being, less so I am defined by the things of this world. And we have to just do it. We have to play it out. We have to get into our relationships, fulfill our career ambitions, and it's all beautiful. It's poetic. And we also have to face the hard things that come up along the journey. So that's the evolutionary journey of the soul through this human experience. Of course, you can manifest experience all kinds of places. You don't just have to do it here, but for the purposes of speaking according to what I understand, and also we're humans, we're going to keep it simple. So let's take that to astrology. The natal chart, which is the position of all the planets at the moment, time, location of your birth. It's really cold in this room, so I'm just going to put this blanket on my feet. The temperature has shifted. Corresponds to, from the point of view of thinking of ourselves as a soul, and that this lifetime is just a chapter in a bigger series. What is the evolutionary context that's been manifested prior to the creation of this lifetime? So it's a way of understanding basically what are the desires that you've been working out leading to human experience. So when I speak about karmic dynamics, I'm basically speaking to the consequence of desires, right? Like, the full colorful spectrum of the human life that we experience is going to produce all kinds of karmic dynamics. And it's not a negative term. It's just sort of cause and reaction, right? So the full karmic reality that we're dealing with, which is going to include the unresolved relationships, the unresolved desires and the experience and the things that we started but we didn't complete, or choices that we've made in the past that had certain results that we are going to have to work out in this lifetime. Everything wants to be kind of uncovered. Like all dynamics want to be brought into the light of awareness. Nothing resolved, nothing remaining that is unresolved. So you can look at the chart and we can say this is the level 1 way of thinking of it. Level 1 is the chart points to the context of your soul journey that's led to the creation of this lifetime. Thus, level 2, it corresponds to the evolutionary intention that underlies this lifetime that you are now currently living. In other words, there's a context along your soul journey that's led you here, and thus too, there's a reason for being here. There's something that you're here to work out. You can see the third layer is a little more intimate, which is kind of off the chart. The chart isn't going to say, the chart will say the past is unalterable, right? Here you are. And then it's also going to say this lifetime has with it certain things that are unalterable as well. And this is a thing that I think a lot of people have difficulty acknowledging or accepting, especially in the West. To quote A Course in Miracles, free will does not mean you get to choose the curriculum. You get to choose how you want to be in relationship to it, right? We have free will, we have agency here. Evolutionary Astrology and A Course in Miracles, they all honor and respect, deeply respect, the truth of free will. But it doesn't say we're free to completely change the course and the content of the curriculum itself. For example, the body that we came into is absolutely the body that we're operating within. We can alter it, but this is the template. Likewise, there are certain things that happen both within cycles of time. You can look at Saturn cycles, which is a very common, easy to understand cycle. Often we'll speak to entire 7 or 14-year periods or even 30-year periods of time wherein the soul is working out particular dynamics and you just have to do it. Like you want to transcend it, you can't. There are phases of life, just like developmentally, children developmentally go through phases of life experience. As a soul, we create phases of experience. There's also events and people and meetings, things that are just going to happen. But then there are things that don't have to happen because we're going to get to a point where we're at the threshold of choice. And free will, in my experience, is a thing that we have only to the extent that we're willing to question and ask ourselves if we have it. Otherwise, we're in the trance of following the patterns of addiction and familiarity, and thus there's a lack of self-awareness. If we want to evolve, it's always going to take us back to the truth of our ability to think differently in this moment. In each experience, there's another realm of agency that we can choose if we want to know that we can choose it. So this is the part that's off the chart. Level 3, our own personal soul evolution. Again, we come into this world with the context that we have. I should also say, you can have the same chart as 30 other people. We all come into this world at different stages of consciousness, of self-realization. So the archetypal patterns of the chart can manifest and express on various levels of self-realization. Mm-hmm. And so you have to always interpret the chart, not blindly. You have to feel the reality of the soul and interpret it accordingly. If a soul's here and they're wanting to, have enlightenment or realization, you'd understand, okay, that's the context, perhaps. I mean, you have to talk to them more about what's going on. Some souls, are going to be working out, I want to, I want to do these things, but I don't want to be rejected by my mainstream church. Or I've been married for 50 years, but I'm starting to question my sexuality and I don't want my church to kick me out. Right? It's like that their evolution might have a lot more to do with embracing their essential individuality and liberating from the consensus, which is, 70% of the world, more or less, right? Whereas other souls, it's going to be just a completely different dimension, and there are many nuances there. So we have to really tune into what's the next step in the soul's evolution for them and interpret the chart like octaves at that level. And there's no judgment in it. It's actually compassion to be able to understand where a soul's at and not speak to them about enlightenment if that's not what they're interested in. Mm-hmm. So that's that dimension, free will, agency. I'm going to evolve in this lifetime, potentially, and we'll set up the stage for ourselves to evolve, right? We're going to usually create circumstances that's going to potentially set the stage for the induction of the necessary kind of self-awareness and reflection that might push us to make different choices in this lifetime. So that's how we look at the chart. And I'll just close this with saying, you can interpret every planet in the chart, and we also work with not just the lunar nodes, but planetary nodes in totality as reflecting the full context of the soul's journey. Like everything can be understood from the lens of this is a part of the soul on its own evolutionary journey and points back to what are the desires of the soul itself. Everything points back down to, and that signature, that what are the core desires, is read in the Pluto archetype, the placement of Pluto in the natal chart. In this modality, we recognize Pluto as corresponding to desire. Bottom line, it's the DNA. It's why we come into this life, because we're working through our desires. Everything is understood relative to the context of the desire nature of the soul. That's it. That's the essence of this evolutionary astrology paradigm as taught by Jeffrey Wolf Green.
Okay. So thank you. That was amazing. I have so many questions, but I'm going to be targeted about this. I'd love to start with, or just to reflect back, the nature of desire, right? Because it relates a lot to Buddhist philosophy, right? Um, but at the same time, like, when I was growing up and learning from my dad a bit about Buddhist philosophy, and just sort of letting go of desire, desire leads to all suffering. It gives desire a pretty bad name, almost to the point of like, all right, I shouldn't desire anything, but that's not really what you're saying. It's almost this catch-22 a little bit of, as a human being, we know we come here to pursue desire, because that's, if you listen to someone saying, go toward what lights you up, right? Or follow your heart. A lot of that it's desire, right? It's you could call it inspiration, you could call it passion. And then there's almost some sort of, it's a different pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. It's actually exhausting the desires. That is the actual goal. It's realizing that none of those things are actually going to make you happy, but the pursuit is worthy in what you learn and gain, right? And it also made me think of, so and I'll ask you about this. I imagine some of what you spoke to relates to the North and South node, but but what sort of came to mind, and I wonder if this relates, is like in Vedic astrology, I know Vedic astrology seems to have a fairly negative or just negative view about a lot of, it's very harsh. And the North and South nodes, like Rahu and Ketu, they don't seem very good. They seem like tricksters. And in that frame, Rahu, the North node, as far as I know, seems to represent desires, but it's almost like a trick in a way. And I wonder, is that similar? Would you relate that to the North node in terms of like what we came here to pursue and learn in terms of desire, but ultimately it doesn't give us what we want? Is that kind of thing? Or would you say it actually relates more to a soul desire and soul purpose? And I guess there's a question in there about, how do you might have answered it with Pluto, but how are you discerning in the chart or otherwise sort of the human ego desires that we may want to learn and play out versus maybe the soul desire, or are they the same? My Pluto in the Western frame is in the 12th house in Scorpio. So I think that brings a certain context and intensity and maybe transcendence, or however you would say it. But yeah, I'm curious how you would relate desire to sort of aspects of the chart, to the nodes, and human versus soul.
Great. So yeah, let me address that last question first, then I'll speak to the Vedic piece.
Okay.
Regarding differentiating between the desires of the soul and the ego desire, you actually can't separate the two, because the ego is a satellite to the soul. The ego itself is not real, meaning it's just a projection of self. Who's projecting it? We are, the soul. So the ego desires are actually a reflection of the soul's intent. There's no such thing as a egoless desire. Yeah. And that's where it's like ultimately we are approaching a consummate yearning desire for God alone, for truth alone, to merge back with love, to know ourselves as only that. And as long as we're in human form, that desire isn't ever going to reach total perfection, because there's always going to be a self wanting it, right? So it's like the achievement of, as I understand it, the ideal human form is the approach of unity with God. And I think it's an ongoing process. But think about desire on a soul level as a concentration of pure energy. I mean, the soul, which is infinitely powerful as an extension of God itself, right? Just like the source of all things, we are actually quite powerful beings. When we know ourselves as a soul, we are able to channel and wield that power ideally for good. And this, of course, can be misused, right? But that is the immense people that really want something really, really bad, for better or for worse, they'll get it, right? Like we can focus strong enough if we want it, and we'll do whatever we need to do to get it.
And I'll interrupt for a second and say this, I'm reminded a lot of, the trendy nature of manifestation and law of attraction.
Sure.
In terms of like, you really can bring to you what you want. The question is it really going to serve you, or is it just going to be taken from you?
Absolutely. We can be utterly concentrated on, let's say, earning more money so we can buy that second car, right? There's nothing wrong with that, because for the soul that's wanting to have this kind of experience, that might be a demonstration of the soul realizing its capacity, its power, right? The desire can be, I want to have wealth. I want to know my power, right? That's teaching us something about ourselves and our innate capacity. And the idea, however, is to keep on going. Right? There's more beyond that. We can have a deep concentration, a deep desire for God and God alone, right? For the truth alone, right? Like a deep, deep single focus concentration. And we can take that into meditation. We can take that into our day-to-day experiences, and sort of in a Plutonian way, be concentrating our attention on only God is real, only God, right? Just these different devotional points of concentration. And that itself will mean our life experience, like everything that we desire and concentrate upon, means we're going to do whatever it takes, but also our life experiences as a function of our concentration are going to coalesce relative to the manifestation of desire. And it's just like, we just have to keep on going. And the thing about this is, when circumstances begin arising, more often than not, it's going to bring up our psychological weakness, right? Where we're limited or stuck and attached to other things, or disempowered in ways that might otherwise keep us from achieving that which we desire, be it union with love or that second car, right? And so we face these thresholds of disempowerment where we're going to feel, oh, life is blocking me, or I don't have the ability, or I'm not strong enough, or I can't make it. And that's just another layer of working through where we don't know our power, where we don't know our agency. So yeah, the ego and our self-concept and our self-image is always going to be a vehicle. Jeff Green described it as the ego is the focusing agent for the soul. So you can't really separate the two. And that's literally why the ego is created, to be a someone to play out experiences so the soul can have that experience. Astrologically, this is represented in the relationship between Pluto and the lunar nodes. And more broadly, the lunar nodes correspond to the moon, right? So the moon corresponds to our self-image, our self-concept. Like when we think about the moon and the lunar nodes in this modality, it's an ego structure. That means this is how I'm emotionally integrating experience to inform a sense of self. The ego structure becomes a way of internalizing relative to the world that we're living. This is who I am. This is what I can take in, and this is what I cannot take in. It's a filter, like a rose-colored glasses, okay? That filter is what allows us to sustain a sense of self. This is who I am. This is what I am. The soul's evolutionary intentions are going to manifest through a particular ego structure as represented by the moon and the south node of the moon. The south node basically says, here are the memories that I have of the kind of ego structure, of the kind of person, of the kind of self-image, the concept that I've had of myself in the past. Mm-hmm. This is my self-concept that I'm bringing into this life, that I'm bringing into this incarnation. We come into this world with a memory. I always quote Adam Gainsbourg, who beautifully described the south node of the moon as pattern of identity making. And that means the position of your south node is going to holographically reflect and represent a full spectrum of different identities, maybe within a particular archetype. but it's spanned through many different expressions, right? You can have South Node in the first house that could have been lifetimes of fighting and war, or lifetimes of just kind of being solo and doing your own thing, right? So, as well as maybe unresolved dynamics of loneliness, or South Node unresolved dynamics of going somewhere and something being cut off short. All of the human memories that happen in virtue of being a human. We read that South Node and also its connection to the moon, but to keep it simple for now, the South Node in context with Pluto. Pluto is the why. Why are you in this human life? The South Node is the what, or the how. It's what you've been doing as a vehicle for that why. So South Node is who you've been. Pluto is why you've been that. South Node are the human experiences you've had. And Pluto is why you've had those human experiences in the first place. Now, in order to evolve, we have to let the ego evolve. The self-concept, the ego structure has to evolve. Otherwise, we're not going to experience anything new. It's playing the same cycle over and over and over again. So the evolutionary desires, the needs of Pluto, need to be fulfilled and actualized by way of an evolving ego structure.
Mm-hmm.
So that ego structure is basically another way of saying, here's a whole realm of experience and a way of knowing myself that will actually help facilitate the fulfillment of my desires. That can be embraced, yay, I'm going to go and do it. It can be embraced from a level of resistance. I don't want to embrace the unknown, the unfamiliar. I want to stay in the past and what's comfortable with me. But we have to evolve. We have to embrace what's new, right? And I'll speak to the Vedic piece in a minute, because I'm very grateful that I've had some good conversations with my friend Adam Ellenboss about this, and he's been explaining the Vedic system.
Oh, nice.
We have to keep on going. And so the North Node basically will take us to the psychological edge of where we're otherwise in total resistance to our own evolutionary growth. So our Pluto position is both our desires, but also where we're going to be in our greatest victimization, right, where we don't know our agency, right? So flip the life experience for ourselves, put ourselves in an unknown or unfamiliar context. It's going to push up right against where we don't know our own agency and our capacity to evolve, or where we're holding on the most, where we're not willing to let go or make changes in our own life. Maybe we can give an example later on, but that's the basic framework. And I think what's most important to understand is, and this is the bottom line, evolution happens through the emotional body. I have to be able to see myself and know myself as different, right? So just without putting Pluto somewhere, South Node in the first, North Node in the seventh. Okay, obviously this is a soul that's been operating predominantly a lone soul doing their own thing. They could be argumentative. They can be resistant to hearing other people's opinions, right? That underlying first house orientation being, bottom line, I am doing my own thing and I'm walking solo, don't get in the way, right? That seventh house polarity being, okay, there's a draw within my own soul to grow, to continue to evolve. I need to be able to incorporate and include relationship. I need to be able to integrate within the realm of intimacy and relationship. So I'm going to be attracting all kinds of people who have different needs, who I need to get along with. I may be attracted to relationships. I might have all these experiences where people say, hey, you're hard to listen to, or you interrupt me a lot. I'm going to notice how I feel lonely, and right, all these experiences are going to emerge where there's going to be a growing desire within the soul to develop that seventh house relationship North Node. Now, let's speak to that Vedic piece.
So before you do that,
please.
can I just reflect back, Ari? So in a way, is it kind of like saying you can't necessarily approach the Plutonian soul journey directly, but you have to approach it through the ego structure of the nodes? Like you have to play, like you can't evade, like if I wanted to just say, no, I'm just going to surrender that game and go directly to my soul's path, like it sounds like what you're saying is that path is developed through this game that was constructed by the nodes and by the lifetimes in order to evolve the ego, and that's what um, progresses the Plutonian evolution. Is that how you might say it?
A little differently. You can just focus on the desire to evolve. That will default manifest through the nodal polarities. Because
So
again,
it will just bring you there anyway.
you have no choice. I mean, if I say, "Do you really want to evolve?" and you're like, "Yes, I do." Great, let's work on what that means for you. Pluto and the nodes, right? The desire to evolve is going to, for each individual soul, take the unique expression of that nodal polarity. Right? So the human ego itself and the development of our human personality and who we know ourselves to be and the kind of journeys that we take in this life are a satellite to our own evolutionary process. We can all desire evolution, but it's going to take the unique form of our unique individuated human experience. But we don't have to be trying to work out the human experience consciously. Like we don't have to even understand it. It's just that's what's happening.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So I don't know a lot about Vedic astrology, and I have an immense amount of respect for it. And I want to be really clear. This is ancient stuff. All of this is ancient stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I think we have to appreciate there's a tendency to impose our own, cultural perspective or understanding. The Western orientation is very different than the Eastern.
Yeah.
And understanding sort of from within itself, Vedic spirituality, I think, is a little bit of a different mindset. And also how old the stuff is. They weren't necessarily talking about the evolutionary journey of the soul in the same way. So what Adam explained to me regarding the nodes is there is that hungry ghost element of the North Node as they teach it, right? But also it doesn't mean you are to avoid it. Right?
Right.
From what I understand, it doesn't mean you shouldn't go there.
Right.
I think it represents the South Node is sort of seen, as I understand it, and this may not be true, in that cosmology as, you know the futility of desires because you've been there already. Right? That's kind of, I would say that's not always true. You can come in with a South Node with a lot of unresolved desires relative to the past that aren't actually yet worked out. But I can really grasp, like you've been there, you've been doing that. That's where it can represent sort of this wisdom or the spiritual knowledge. But the North Node is absolutely, there's more, right? So from the point, I think Vedic, that culture, I attended a service yesterday and the teacher was speaking about the Indian technology and how they weren't so much into like making things easier, like sitting on cushions and having an electric heater to keep the ghee warm so that you can use the ghee for the ceremony where you're putting the ghee in the oil and lighting fire.
Yeah.
They were doing this puja. He's like, yeah, you heat the ghee and you put it in a jar, but it's going to get cold again and you have to like heat it up again or whatever. They have a warmer here in the United States. People are sitting on these nice cushions. So he said in India, their technology is all about getting out of this world as quickly as possible. Right. Whereas
leaving the body because the body doesn't matter.
No, I don't want to degrade it. No, they're about liberation. Like the core of it, the spirituality and cosmology is about let's evolve and not have to continue on this endless incarnational cycle of life and death, right? Rebirth.
Because it's suffering, a lot of it.
Because it is, a lot of it is suffering. It is true. But here in the States, their technologies are, a little electric heater to keep the oil that you're using for your pujas warm. Cushions.
The West might want to try to ease the suffering, maybe you would say.
Exactly. And he was actually describing it not in any kind of better than or lower than way. And I really respected that. There are certain things that might be missed or some scars or patterns that might be developed in that desire to liberate and transcend and get beyond. Absolutely. But I bring that up just to really reflect. There's just a certain orientation. Yeah. That we have to be able to kind of get our mind inside that orientation to fully grasp it. That's what I'm wanting to endeavor as I'm wanting to learn more about how they thought of the nodes. So the point is you still have to embrace that North Node. And I'll share a teaching that Adam actually shared with me that I think is just brilliantly, I don't remember where this might have been a Buddhist teaching, I don't know, but I love this story and I can relate to it. Okay. There's this guy meditating and I'm probably going to fudge the story, but you'll get the idea. He's meditating and he's on the verge of samadhi. He's on the verge of full, complete realization, right? And he sees just over across from the little cave he's meditating in, over the field, a baby deer who's like stuck in a fence and is suffering immensely. And he's torn. Like, I'm about to leave the illusion of this world, but I see this deer suffering, and he couldn't help but feel this immense compassion for the deer. So he got up and he saved this deer, and he apparently spent the rest of his life, tending to and taking care of this deer, kind of like sustaining this like edge of samadhi. And then he died, and he was reincarnated as a deer. And he was manifested just outside of this holy temple, and he was fully self-aware. He knew who he was, he knew his past life, and he knew what was going on. And he was able to stay by that temple and meditate and hear the teachings, and he achieved final liberation in that lifetime. I love that story because I think you said this earlier. It's like sort of a catch-22, kind of. It's like stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
If you don't save that deer, you're gonna be left with guilt. Right? You'll feel the grief of like, I didn't save that deer. If you save that deer, you're gonna be left with the attachment to this deer, right? You're leaving eternity behind to deal with an ephemeral experience in the dream state. But like, there's no truth or value in saying leave the world behind. Don't save that deer. Don't follow what you're feeling is really important to follow. Because if you don't, it's not going to go away.
And
right?
it's in a way, maybe it wouldn't go any faster. Like, you wouldn't necessarily get to where you're going any faster. I don't know if you'd agree with that, because in the premise of the story, it seems like, well, if he was right about to get to samadhi, like it would be a direct path. But I wonder if you could say, in a way, whether you stay on the cushion or save the deer, you may not get to where you would like to go any faster. I'm not sure. Would you say it that way?
I would say and this is my own experience, there's a humility of realizing I can't control the situation here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to organize how I'm going to wake up. And I think the very last point in this story is the surrender to experience itself. And I think that's what the North Node is about in its essence. We can try to be like, I'm not going to generate any new desires, but it's like, there are many souls on a spiritual path that may have had lifetimes deeply immersed in monastic type lives, right?
Yeah.
But there may be deep spiritual experience. There might be unresolved desire for intimacy, for love, for family, to be held, right? And say, well, that's all happening on the inside, right? And I don't have to manifest, and that's true. Everything can manifest and arise. I don't have to necessarily act on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's great. And if that's true, then that's true. And let's see what happens. Because there's a threshold where we just have to yield ourselves to the path that wants to walk us home. And if we're trying to control it and assert our will on how it's going to look and where and when it's going to happen, I think we might be creating our own karma there.
Yeah.
There's something very humbling about yielding ourselves to the contours of the life journey that is kind of smarter than us.
Yeah.
And that sometimes means being willing to just get dirty.
Yeah. And firstly, I'll relate that to myself, because I do feel, sometimes I say I feel caught between worlds. Like, part of me does want a direct path, but every time I've tried to pursue it, something pulls me back in. I do have all these wounds. I have these relationship wounds. I have these sort of, career wounds, various things that if I try to, go directly to some kind of transcendence, it doesn't work. I suffer probably just as much or even more. There's resistance there. There's still a resistance there that I have to surrender to in some way. And sometimes I feel like there are infinite faces of surrender, because you can do it consciously trying to control it. I'm surrendering. I'm not, but and then if something invites you in, if there's a deer, well, what about surrendering to the experience of saving the deer, right?
Exactly.
So
So much trust.
So I relate a lot to that. And I wonder, because I know we're already coming up on our time, if I could, and if there's something else you'd like to elucidate, feel free. But if I could paint you a picture, it would be, it's for selfish reasons, my personal chart of Pluto and then North and South Node, and see how you would interpret that as sort of an example. Cool.
And I'll qualify it with them. I'll speak to it not so much relative to your, because that would be a deeper, intimate space,
Sure.
but archetypally in a very
Yeah.
generic way.
Yeah, for sure. Great. So in the Western frame, my Pluto is in the 12th house in Scorpio, and my North, you actually spoke to this in your free class. My North node is in the 4th house. My South node is in the 10th house. North node, 4th house Pisces next to my moon. I was born like in eclipse energy, full moon eclipse energy, and South node next to the sun in 10th house, Virgo. So yeah, 4th house, 10th house, then Pluto in the 12th.
Okay, so just to simplify it, so the South Node in Pisces in the 4th.
Yeah.
Right?
North node in Pisces in the, yeah.
Okay, North Node in Pisces in the 4th. Okay, so South Node. Okay, so let's look at the ego. Let's just look at each part by itself. South Node in Virgo in the 10th. What kind of ego structure have you developed in the past that has informed your sense of self coming into this lifetime? Meaning, these are the memories. Okay, Virgo in the 10th house. This obviously has to do with your work function, wanting to be of service. You've known yourself relative to the manifestation of responsibilities and work functions that you've been performing in society in a way that's relevant or personally useful for you and helpful for others. And all the kinds of karmic dynamics archetypally that we can speak to, right? So Virgo in the 10th house can speak to an immense amount of shame and guilt, right? Relative to both where we've been conditioned by ideas of what's appropriate, who we're supposed to be, or we've found ourselves in work conditions, 10th house, jobs, roles, that have been that have induced a sense of inferiority or masochism or self-punishment. Doing role that's this like 10th house Virgo could be, taskmaster slavery type, like holding a weight of hard, heavy, back-breaking labor and not getting any kind of respect, right? Can be a lot of martyrdom, sacrifice, masochism, guilt, shame. I'm not good enough. I made mistakes in the past. Let's take this, right? Virgo in the 10th house can be guilt relative to having made mistakes and neglected necessary responsibilities, and then thus hyper self-awareness and meticulousness relative to being in integrity with everything that one does, based on an internal sense of, I must have sinned in the past. I feel a lot of guilt, and I'm really sensitive to doing the wrong thing, right? All of these are some of the many expressions that can be manifested with Virgo 10th house from the point of view of memories of who we are and where we're coming from. Okay, so let's just look at the Pisces North Node as just the opposite kind of identity structure. Mm-hmm. This is about surrendering to the waters of emotion, developing a sense of self that's linked to unconditional love. On one level, this can be about letting go of control. And the deeper question, like, who am I? Where's home? Where's love? Where's family? Where's nurturing? All of those things, right? Where there's been a lot of control, work, responsibility, shame, all of those dimensions.
Yeah.
The Pisces North Node is developing a sense of oneself that is forgiving, that is loving. It's learning how to bring kindness and softness and love relative to where things might have been harsh or tense. It's also like maybe there's a need to develop the emotional body to learn how to understand oneself and receive, 4th house is both the mother holding the child, but then in all the forms of how we're receiving care and nurturance in this life. And then Pisces is unconditional love. So like really this desire perhaps to experience more love in the human experience. Right?
Checks out.
That can be like family and all different kinds of expressions, right?
Yeah.
Relative to Pluto, keep it simple, in Scorpio in the 12th house, underlying desire for transcendence, wanting to merge and unite with that which is greater than yourself to become an instrument of it. That can mean an intense desire to do good and not induce any separation. I want to be an instrument of love, but also deep fear and resistance of losing yourself, right? There can be a lot of ways in which you act out, those desires for transcendence and doing good and saving others, but are actually just coming from a fear of exercising appropriate discernment or discrimination. So, this can be relative to the 10th house Virgo. doing good, helping others, saving others, doing what's, all that kind of stuff.
Hi, folks. Sorry for the abrupt transition, but Ari had to run due to some family duties. And I just wanted to take this time to reflect on this conversation, which is a much older conversation by now, happening at the end of 2024, and reflect for a bit on precisely what I was just pestering Ari about in terms of my own personal chart and the 4th and 10th houses, which are very important in my soul's evolution, the reasons why I came into this life, and what to play out regarding career, and I suppose you could interpret the 4th house as the emotional body, as Ari was saying, the emotional home and the foundation of one's life. And within that context, since this conversation, there has been a lot of that for me. There's a significant reason I haven't not only not published, but not really record. I've recorded one more episode after this that I'm going to publish that happened in late 2024. But following that, I needed a huge break. I needed a huge reset, and I needed to attend to my emotional home and my emotional body. And I have not stepped up to this microphone until this very moment. So, and I'm not sure exactly how it's going to continue. I sense it will continue, but I know that it has to continue in alignment with that axis in balance, my emotional home, my emotional body, as well as my desires, right? Or ambitions, you might say, for career. Although this to me is not just career, this is what I would call passion and my life's work and service. But as you just heard Ari reference, that service can get mangled with a sense of pressure, self-pressure to perform for some idea of success, maybe rooted in feelings of guilt or martyrdom, or whatever else is wrapped up in that sense of desire for public recognition, success, career ambition, and service. And so, this really all started as a creative outlet for me. I don't really make any money from this podcast or anything, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a clear career path, but it's all become integrated into how I show up in the world and what I want to express. What feels important for me to convey to all those who are interested in listening. And of course, my ultimate intention is that it is a service. But I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on my own journey and how that service has had to come into alignment and into balance with my body, my mind, my emotions, my foundation, and that true sense of health on the deepest level. And that's been a lifelong journey for me. If you've been listening to this podcast, you've probably heard me reference ad nauseum about the times in recent years when I left my clinic and launched out on my own and started a lot of these creative projects. Well, I was invited, as I like to say, by spirit, by the universe, by my body, to once again revisit that need for balancing. And maybe I'll do a longer episode on the journey I've been through. I've hesitated because I was literally in it and really not in a state to offer something to the world. It really needed to be a reclusive time for me. But it was very deep, and it involved, reemerging anxieties, deep childhood wounds, reemerging panic attacks, all kinds of things that that strongly pulled me back into myself, and among other things, including a physical move. But all that is to say, I just wanted to take a moment to, I guess, express the relevance of these kinds of frameworks, right? Not as an attachment, not to, you know, put all our hopes and dreams onto and disempower ourselves in service of this authority, because it's not an authority, it's just a tool, and we can use tools to support our journey and to help create context and structure for what we might be going through. And for me, usually it's actually best in retrospect, right? Like I can look back and see how my life has unfolded according to this chart. And it was in particular Saturn going through Pisces and over my natal moon that was really leading the charge of my need to ground. In Vedic astrology, they call it the sati sati. So it's meaningful to me, not so much in the sense that it helps you escape or avoid having to go through it, because we have to live this human life, right? No framework is going to prevent that. But the innately intellectual and curious part of me loves to see how it all ties together, and I do feel it ties together neatly here, even though the going through it is actually quite messy. So I just wanted to leave you with this musing, this reflection, and brief quasi life update. Maybe there will be more. You know, the other aspects of my online persona have been totally off, including, you know, the Patreon page and all the other things I've been doing, the Insight Timer workshops and stuff. And I sense that I may step back into all of that. But again, it has to come in balance. And I appreciate having this episode to put this out first, because it does, I think, reflect that need for balance in the soul's journey, for both the karma we come in with unresolved to play out through the ego, the desires we pursue to either generate new karma or, in other words, learn new lessons, and just live the holistic path that we came here to live with, as Ari had discussed, with Pluto sort of underneath it all, disrupting and supporting that transformation, which, as Ari said in no uncertain terms, we simply cannot control. And it plays out the way that it must and the way that it needs to. And the best we can do is surrender to it. So this has been a continuation of my surrender experiment over the past several months. And stepping back into this is a continuation of that surrender, right? Because surrender can hold many faces, as I said. Surrender can certainly be letting everything go and retreating, as I felt I needed to do. But it can also be a surrendering back into the ambition or the desire to express oneself and to step back into some form of light and service. And that is what's in my heart. That is what I love to do. And I will continue to learn to the best of my ability how to do it in balance. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and please forgive the abrupt nature of this transition. And maybe there will be more where this comes from. Take care.